Once upon a time, there was a prince who could not speak. He was not born without a voice, nor was he cursed by some wicked spell. His silence grew around him like a thick stone wall, brick by careful brick, built by the hands of others. Be strong, they told him, when he cried as a boy. Be fierce, they urged him when he paused to pick white flowers in the royal garden. Be a man, they commanded, when he trembled beneath the weight of his father's crown. And so the prince tucked his soft words into his chest, buried his trembling heart beneath armor, and swallowed the sound of his own sorrow. The people said he was noble, they said he was brave, but they did not know he was voiceless, trapped in a kingdom of noise that did not belong to him. And for he would one day be king, the prince lived for many years in silence, speaking in sword swings, in cold knots, in the hard set of his jaw. But a man who does not speak his own name will one day forget who he is, and the prince was beginning to forget. The years passed, and the prince grew tall, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed. Everything a king was meant to be. He led soldiers into battle. He sparred in the courtyard until his knuckles split. He won tournaments with grace and precision, for the cheers of the crowd rang hollow in his ears. He wore silence like a chain mail, a perfect fit, a polished garment. In the village the boys had talked admire him. See how strong he is, their father said. See how he does not weep. See how he does not bend. And the boys tucked their own softness away, piece by piece, longing to become like the prince, who did not speak. But they did not see how the silence weighed upon him. They did not see the nights he sat alone in the palace garden, hands trembling, heart wandering, longing to say something, anything that was his own, longing to tell the truth, that he was afraid, that he was aching, that sometimes he still wanted to just pick wild flowers. He had learned to fight, he had learned to rule, but he had not learned how to be. The court praised him, the people bowed to him, the kingdom called him strong, but the prince began to wonder, if I must be silent to be strong, is it truly my strength? His answer came, as answers often do in stories, in the form of a dragon. It was a beast unlike any he had faced before. It was not a creature of scale and smoke, but something more familiar, something that had caught itself in the bones of his ancestors. The dragon roared with the voices of the kings who came before him. Be hard, be ruthless, be unfeeling. It carried no fire in its belly, only the crushing weight of expectation, the sharp claws of tradition, the suffocating heat of a crown worn too tightly. And when the prince stood before it, sword in hand, he felt the familiar shape of silence rising in his throat. The dragon did not wish to kill him, it wished to keep him exactly as he was. The prince gripped his sword tighter, knuckles pale, muscles burning from the weight of it. He had been trained for this. He had been taught his whole life that dragons must be slain, that strength was a sharp blade and a steady hand. He could see the path laid out before him, a quick strike, a hollow victory, another mask to wear. But something deep inside him, something soft and aching, whispered no. The dragon snarled its breath hot as summer storms. Its voice, a thunderous echo of every command he had ever obeyed. Be hard, be ruthless, be unfeeling. The sword trembled in his grip, but the prince allowed his blade. The crowd of soldiers who had followed him, they gasped, for they had never seen a prince face a dragon without drawing blood. But he did not need to kill it. He needed to break the silence that bound him to it. And so for the first time he spoke. His was quiet like ice beneath a falling sun, unfamiliar and fragile, but it was his. "I'm afraid," the dragon stilled. "I'm not ruthless." The dragon thought to sweep the earth, but did not strike. "I'm not a weapon. I'm not a hollow crown. I'm not the silence you build around me." And as the words poured from him, words that tucked away for years, his voice grew steadier, louder, richer. "I feel, I weep, I love, I bend, I rise." The dragon roared, thrashing in protest, but it could not bear the weight of its truth. For it was not his sword that opposed the beast, it was his voice, the unspoken words, the trembling softness, the open-handed bravery of a man who refused to be caged. And when the dragon's form crumbled into dust, the prince stood alone, no longer voiceless, no longer silent, not a conqueror, not a weapon, but a man, a king. The prince returned to his kingdom of changed men, not because he slew the dragon, but because he did not. He ruled with a voice that trembled, that loved, that wept, that loved, and the people followed him, because they heard the truth in his words. The young boys in the village no longer hid their softness away. The old men began to set down the burdens they had carried for too long. The kingdom flourished, not beneath the weight of a hard king, but beneath the gentleness of a man who had learned to rise. And though many tales were told of the prince who could not speak, the story they loved best was this, that even as a king, even in all his glory, he would still wake early in the morning to tend the palace gardens himself, barehanded, barehearted, with dirt beneath his fingernails, and wild flowers cradled in his arms. They say he brought those flowers to the queen as proof of his softness rather than strength, and she, wise and warm, loved him all the more for it. They also say if you walk the garden paths at dawn, you might still hear his voice, low, steady, tender, teaching young boys to plant seeds with careful hands. And if you are wise, you will listen, you will follow, and perhaps you too will remember how to rise.